Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me. The topic of my speech today will be Think Outside the Booth, Adventures in Political Interpreting in the USA. And so I'll be discussing my experiences as an interpreter in the wilds of American politics. And I say in the wilds because for those of you who are used to very neat, orderly interpretation in a booth with a console, with a proper microphone, could be intensely triggered by some of the technology that you're going to see here. So consider this your official trigger warning. First, I'll give you a little bit of geographic context. I am from and am currently based in Iowa, which is a small state with a population of only 3 million people, located almost in the dead center of the United States and regarded by people from the coasts as pretty inconsequential. It's referred along with the rest of the Midwest as flyover country, which means for most people from the coasts, the extent of their experience with Iowa or the states around it is seeing it from an airplane window when they're flying over it on the way to one or the other of the coasts. But despite this, it is a state with outsized political influence that is not proportional to its importance in other respects, because every 4 years during the presidential campaign, it is the first state to have what's referred to as a primary election. Although it's not exactly a primary election, it's a caucus. We'll be discussing the nuts and bolts of that later on in this session. The Iowa caucuses draw an intense amount of attention from both politicians and the media, despite the fact that historically winning the Iowa caucuses have not been an indicator of going on to greater success. For example, in my lifetime, Bill Clinton did not win the Iowa caucuses in 1992, but did go on to win the Democratic Party nomination. And more recently, in 2016, Donald Trump did not win the Republican caucuses, but nonetheless went on to victory in the rest of the campaign. My specific journey in political interpretation begins here. This is a screenshot from a YouTube recording of a radio program called Immigration Politics Bilingual. And so I did the best I could, but I couldn't find an image of myself on camera, but that's my arm if you look closely enough. And the gentleman who you see to the right is a gentleman named Dave Leach, who is a local Republican activist who actually occupies an interesting space within the Republican Party in that he is both a fundamentalist Christian and strongly pro-immigration. I dare say that would make him one of very few within the Republican Party. But nonetheless, to further his message, he was given airtime on a Spanish speaking radio station every Saturday morning, where he would have on different guests to share his viewpoints on immigration and specifically how the Bible supports a more open immigration policy. And because it was a Spanish language station and he did not speak Spanish, I was there to help interpret both for him and his guests. And this was all done consecutively. I did that show for a couple of months and it eventually ran its course. And I think the station eliminated it. But in the course of doing that show, I got to know the owner of the station, who then called me back to interpret when he had a bigger name guest come on and be interviewed. This was in 2012, and this is the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, who back in the Clinton administration was Bill Clinton's nemesis, as it were, as the leader of the Republican Party at a time that the Republicans flipped control of both the House and Senate, and so were in a position to block Bill Clinton's agenda. So after leaving Congress, I don't know exactly what he did for several years, but he resurfaced on my radar in 2012 when he was getting ready to join the fray among the Republican candidates seeking the nomination in 2012, which would have been Obama's second term. And so among the field of Republican candidates, he stood out in that he was, this is relative with a giant grain of salt, he was relatively pro-immigration, which in that group where people were literally advocating for the construction of moats with alligators in them along the border, it passes for pro-immigration. And so he came on this program to be interviewed, and I was there to interpret for him. And so some progress from the last time I was at the station was that I was now able to interpret simultaneously. And you see me using what's referred to as a stereo amplified listener, which is a sort of primitive transmitter, except it doesn't transmit anything per se, because it operates, if you get down to the essence of it, it works like a stethoscope. I talk into it, I can whisper into it, and the person on the other end of it hears me as if I were speaking full volume. And so that's how I was doing simultaneous interpreting for him. This was before I had invested in wireless equipment. And so I was interpreting for him simultaneously. And then when he would give an answer in English, I was interpreting that into the microphone simultaneously into Spanish. And so you see that he's next to a microphone, but that microphone was actually turned off so that he and I wouldn't be competing in terms of our sound levels. And so this was a big moment for me that was the first big name that I had the chance to work with. And then I was able to parlay into further work with some other higher profile politicians. Fast forward to the next electoral campaign. This was in 2015, so before the 2016 caucus and election season. And this is Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders giving a speech at an outdoor festival. You can see that it is an outdoor festival because if you look behind him, next to this booth where he is giving a political speech is a booth selling, it looks like, clothes, different clothes, baby clothes, maybe some blankets. And so because candidates, and this is now a Democratic candidate, because candidates were eager to court the Latino vote, they came to the Latino street festival, and I was there on hand to interpret for anybody who just happened to walk by who was interested in hearing the speech. And in the course of doing this, I got to use the StenoMask microphone, which I affectionately refer to as the elephant trunk, because when you have it on, it looks like there's a trunk coming out of your face. It actually works pretty well in that it muffles your sound very effectively. I don't love it because it is not hands-free unless you were to strap it to your face somehow. I don't think it has that as a attachment or an accessory necessarily. But those were the tools that I was given. This was not my equipment that I brought to this. And so that's what we had to work with. And you can tell that this woman, everybody else is watching the speech. You can tell that this woman is really puzzled at the fact that I am there talking into this thing. She seems a little wary of the whole thing. An interesting story about this day was that the senator was actually offered, again, remember, this is a Latin street festival. The senator was actually offered by the organizers to give his speech from a wrestling ring that they had set up a couple stalls down to be for there to be an exhibition of traditional Mexican style wrestling, or lucha libre, as it's said in Spanish. However, the organizers ultimately nixed that idea because they said it would seem unfair that the other candidates were not offered the opportunity to deliver their speech from a wrestling ring. I personally really wish he had been afforded that opportunity, because I think that would have been a powerful visual for his image as a champion willing to fight and grapple with entrenched powers in favor of the working class. But alas, it was not to be. Fast forward to the summer of 2019, and so this is leading up to the 2020 electoral campaign, and the same senator, Bernie Sanders, who by American politics standards is considered almost the extreme of the left spectrum politics, but by European standards would maybe be center right, if not fully in the middle, just to give you an idea of the political context. But Senator Sanders launched another campaign for the Democratic nomination and was giving a speech indoors this time. But again, the setup is charitably described as unorthodox. This is at an event hall that hosts dances and concerts and weddings and baptisms, and that has a bar. And so my interpreting partner and I were given the choice of setting up wherever we wanted to. There is no booth. There is no console. That is the reality of the situation when you are dealing with electoral politics with events that are held in venues like this that are not set up like the European Parliament. And so as interpreters, that's part of the challenge for us, is figuring out a way to make it work with this odd equipment and with the strange setup. And so we chose to be behind the bar because it was a flat surface to work from. It was a good sight line to the speaker, and we were relatively close to be able to hear him. And you'll notice here that I'm not kidding when I say it's a bar. This is the soda gun that that night they were shooting Coke and water out of. Unfortunately, when we were there, it was not operational, so we were not able to actually get water for ourselves to drink during the session. Fast forward, this was in the summer of 2019, so this would have been about a year ago, the winter of 2020. This is the night of the actual Iowa caucus. And if you're not familiar with the process, the Iowa caucus is a means of voting for presidential candidates that is follows the principle of voting with your feet. People from a neighborhood that are affiliated with a certain party get together in a big space like this, and then organizers say, everybody who supports candidate X, go stand in that corner. Everybody who supports candidate Y, go stand in the other corner. And then candidates who don't have enough votes, their supporters have to join another candidate or basically have their vote go to waste. And I personally, because I was traveling for work on the night of the caucuses and couldn't go to my local precinct to participate in the caucuses, I was effectively disenfranchised and not able to participate. I took this picture at a caucus site where I was participating as a volunteer interpreter, not as an actual voting member. I believe this stage of the proceedings was when people had selected their candidates. The people who you can see to the left were supporters of Senator Elizabeth Warren, and there weren't very many of them. So I think they were not considered a viable group and later had to scatter and join another candidate. And so my role there, actually, you can see there is a gentleman in the front row. I'm going to circle him here. There's a gentleman here in the front row wearing headphones. At this point, I still don't have a booth. I still don't have a console, but at the very least, I have wireless equipment. And so I'm at a distance from him, and he is listening through a receiver to be able to hear the interpretation of the proceedings. And as a part of the process, representatives of different candidates give speeches to try to persuade people from other groups to defect and join them and support their candidate. This was, from what I saw, very orderly, but subsequently, the caucuses descended into abject chaos when the votes were not able to be tabulated, and it took about 2 weeks to get results, and it's not even sure that the caucuses will remain the first stop on the voting in the voting process next time around, because there was such backlash to the poor handling of the process in 2020. I am close to the end of my time, and so I think that is where we're going to end. I had some slides showing my work in the political realm this year around the COVID crisis, interpreting for my governor with her press briefings on COVID-19, but we will have to leave that for another day. I hope you've enjoyed this discussion of American politics from an interpreter's perspective, and I welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.